The Irish provinces are out for their first game in the newly branded Champions Cup this weekend, and in many ways difficult first round fixtures for them. We might start with Munster under Foley, who had that big result against Leinster a couple of weeks ago, but a real trip to potential banana skin at the weekend.
Yeah, a trip to Sale. It's a new competition. It's a little bit bizarre, Will, because this year there's always been a lead up previously to European weekends. The Heineken Cup has really got the imagination of the Irish provinces, but this year it seems that their focus seems to be on the Pro 12, and it's a little bit colder, the introduction into the competition at the moment. The English and French obviously have been very instrumental in setting up this competition, and it looks like that they're driving it through and that they expect to be quite successful. Foley will be relatively happy. The last 2 weeks, did a very good win last weekend, and obviously the weekend before that against Leinster in Dublin. That was a fairly big win for them, and he's brought back some of the old principles of Munster rugby. They've gone back to basics. You don't see the second rows hanging out the wing anymore. He's been kind of very understated in how he's made the points that he's gone back to what Munster rugby is. And I think this weekend you're going to see that the European, I suppose, enthusiasm of Munster over the last couple of years is going to kick in, and I wouldn't be surprised if they got a good win in Sale this weekend.
Was it important for them to go back to basics in a way? Because we heard Paul O'Connell say at the tail end of last season, we prefer when we play Munster Cup rugby rather than what was being attempted.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to actually consider, because they've gone back to real basics. They've really trimmed it back, and against Munster against Leinster, they were really just coming one out runners all day, and Leinster were a little bit naive in how they defended against that. Mm-hmm. And I would be afraid that if they got the French teams later on in the competition and they stayed that narrow, that the French teams, and maybe even the more I suppose classical of the English teams, maybe Saracens and Northampton, who could put a lot of weight and strength onto the ball, could do serious damage to Munster teams. But that said, Munster are a different animal in the European competition. When the teams come to Thomond Park, that's going to be there's going to be that atmosphere. You're not going to have an half-empty stadium. It's going to hop on those days, and I think that the passion and enthusiasm, not only for the Munster team but also for the Munster supporters, can shine through. And 4 wins could be enough, because there's 3 second-place teams getting into the quarter-finals. It's going to be very tight. It's going to be mathematically very, very tight. Tries, losing bonus points, etc. are going to come into it, but I wouldn't be surprised if Munster are in the quarter-final at the end of the day.
For Munster, is it again a case of, like it's been in recent years, make sure you get at least a defensive bonus point first time out away from home against English opposition, take it from there?
Yeah, possibly, but they would probably argue that Sale are one of the middle-of-the-road English teams, and they've done really well with Steve Diamond. 2 years ago, I think it was, or even last season, they lost their first 7 or 8 games. Steve Diamond went from being CEO back into the tracksuit, and he made a huge difference. They've Danny Cipriani there, they have a lot of flair. And I think that they're going to be a decent team, but I think that Munster just know how to grind out big victories on days like this. It's kind of set up for a Munster victory, which Foley knows what it takes to win in a close encounter like that. He's got some able deputies on the pitch insofar as O'Connell. Okay, he's missing a couple, but Hurley in the centre has been a bit of a find at the moment.
O'Mahony's back now again.
O'Mahony's back, another serious leader in their team. And, they've found a couple of players. James Cronin has been done really, really well. I'm not sure if Duncan Casey's a fit this weekend, but he's been a bit of a find. And, Felix Jones has led them very, very well. And, this is a team that's missing Donegal Ryan, Keith Earls, a number of quality players. And I mean, we're probably leaving out those players that were name-checking Conor Murray, who's arguably the best scrum half in Europe, if not possibly in the world at the moment. His kicking game is unparalleled in professional rugby.
Brings us around to Leinster nicely when you talk about injuries. They could probably field quite a nice team from injured players at the moment with the amount that they have out. I mean, it has to be a huge blow, particularly to lose many of their leaders who are injured at the moment, like no Cian Healy, no Sean O'Brien. You go back into their backs where they've had to slot guys in all season. It's not been an ideal preparation for the Champions Cup for Leinster.
No, certainly hasn't. I suppose they're lucky this weekend. They're at home in the first game and they're against the Wasps side. Wasps have been quite good in the Premiership already this season. They had a big win against Bath, I think 2 weekends ago. A Bath side that put 42-0 up on Leicester the previous week. So Wasps are competitive. That said, they've got lost a little bit of the flair that they had with Joe Schmidt, but I think Matt O'Connor's actually made them very difficult to beat. They were nearly hammered against Munster in a one-score game, if that makes sense. At the end of the day, people forget that it came down to one score. There's some quality operators. Madigan, while it's arguable that there's an argument out there that he's a better 10 than Goppert, he gives them huge options, and I suppose when you've got the injury issues that Leinster have at the moment, you need to put your best 15 players out. So having an Ian Madigan that can fit seamlessly in a 12 or 15 is a huge addition to them. And also, arguably, Leinster actually getting to blood young lads that hadn't happened for a while at the top level. Yes, Joe Schmidt brought them in at Pro 12, and when they won the Amlin Cup, he kind of made a pointed effort to leave more established players out at the latter end of the competition and blood these young players. But you see the two Byrne brothers from Carlow getting regular game time, Tyke Furlong's getting regular game time, Ben Marshall's getting regular game time. There's a lot of players being blooded by Leinster at the moment, and while they could and should win this weekend, I think that arguably they're going to be more competitive, if not this year, further down the line next year, the year after, and you're going to see them being serious competitors again in the European competitions.
It might help in the grand scheme of things that some of these lads get game time as well, because we saw Craig Gilroy eventually make his way to Munster. Fitzgerald had seriously considered his future 2 years ago, just because there wasn't the game time to go around, because it was the fairly regular 15 under Schmidt.
Yeah, and that's kind of professional rugby is about having a big squad. There's a statistic put out there recently in the media that any one time 30%, on average 30% of your squad are injured. So if you have a squad of 50, you're talking 15 guys are injured. And Leinster, I think at the moment are missing 6 British Lions going into this weekend. Leicester had 23 players who were internationals missing the weekend that they played Saracens. So I mean, the beauty is that they're bringing through these players, they're giving them top level game exposure, and the reality is that not only are Leinster going to benefit, but Ireland is going to benefit. Like Jack McGrath, Marty Moore came out of nowhere last year to be part of a Six Nations winning squad, and Leinster are doing that again. Tyke Furlong has been talked as better than Marty Moore, and so there's 3 potential international tight heads on the one squad. So it's only good for Leinster rugby.
Well, Ulster play Leicester, a side they've played an awful lot in recent years, and in fairness they've got good results against in recent years. Yeah,
they seem to have a hoodoo on Leicester. Last year was a phenomenal game, but I think if we stand back and look at it coldly, if Ruan Panera wasn't on the pitch that night, I don't know what way it would have went. Obviously they're missing him because of his rugby championship injury that he picked up with South Africa. But I watched their match against Glasgow last weekend. I thought they were phenomenal. They played a really clever game of rugby. They identified weaknesses in the Glasgow makeup that other teams possibly hadn't, and they went after it. They got 15 points out of the scrum and maul in the first half alone, and you saw some of the more established players like Tommy Bowe showing some form just at the right time, and that's a sign of a quality side. They've also found a new talented centre, Stuart McCluskey. Now whether they go with him this weekend or not, I don't know, but he's really keeping Stuart Olding, who's a phenomenal talent, out of the game as well. They've also gone with Ian Humphreys at 10 fairly regularly ahead of Paddy Jackson, so they have a lot of strength in depth, and that can only argue very well going into this weekend, because it's just going to be in competition for places is high, so they're going to be motivated, and they've had some good wins lately. Okay, they lost on the road to Zebra, but I think Pat Lamb said it last weekend that those Italian teams are kind of identifying the Irish games that they're going after. So that wasn't really a big shock when you consider that maybe they rested a few players that weekend. I think they're going to be very much in the shake-up. They're going to try and make up for the disappointment of last year. Had they not had that early sending off in the quarterfinals to Saracens, it's arguable that they would have played in the final and not Saracens.
They've had their issues off the field, which have been, I suppose, very well publicised. But in terms of consistency, really good in the Pro 12 the last 3-4 seasons, and a consistent top 8 team in Europe, including that final where they went to play Leinster.
Yeah, and really, no more than, I suppose, Leinster over the last few years. They're bringing through homegrown players, like they've had Craig Gilroy, Stuart McCluskey, as we said, Paul Marshall, Rory Best is very much a homegrown guy, and they've brought home Roger Wilson. There are a lot of Ulster guys, but they've benefited from some astute foreign influences. They had Johan Muller, obviously Panera's been there, they had John Afoa, but now that they've moved on, they've actually brought in Irish lads.
It's been about kind of a re-recruitment.
Yeah, it's been. But Alan O'Connor now has been a little bit of a find for them. He's a guy from Skerries who just didn't get the breakthrough in Leinster and was going to college in Ulster, and he's been a bit of a find for them. I think their big challenge is when they get into a dogfight and they have to go man to man. They haven't really been exposed to that yet, and I think somewhere along the line they are, whether that's a big French side or it's a very basic game like Munster might put to them, but they definitely are one of the better teams in Europe at the moment, and they have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, and I think they're only going to benefit from that in terms of competitiveness.
Brings us around to the final Irish province, Connacht, who are in the newly restructured Challenge Cup. They play La Rochelle this weekend, a team that you might probably expect to win. And Connacht have been teasing their fans this week. I don't know if you've seen all the pictures of Mullaghina in kind of full training. Is there a chance we might see him at the weekend?
I think he might actually be involved in the match day squad. I'm not sure if he's going to get game time, because I know that Akibuki is in Ireland now at the moment, but he's been rested, and they're wrapping him up. They have the Ospreys in their next Pro 12 game. I don't think I think the Challenge Cup might be used to blood young lads, to be quite honest. I think the Connacht have had a brilliant start. They've only had one defeat out of 6 games in the Pro 12 to date. It's a realistic opportunity to get into the top 6 and get into European rugby on their own back next year. So I think what you might see is the likes of Shane Layden, Conor Finn, those type of guys getting actual game time this weekend, and maybe you might see Mullaghina coming off the bench with about 10 minutes just to get a game under his belt and to maybe fill a few seats in for the match against the Ospreys.
Yeah, because I'd imagine a lot of fans in Galway would probably be getting a little bit tetchy about having not seen him so far, because a lot of money is being spent on him, and people want to see their star player. Yeah,
but Pat Lam has been kind of pointed in saying that not only was he coming as a player, he was coming as a bit of a mentor, and he was coming kind of to get inside the heads of the young players and to bring those players along. And in fairness, Nigel Carlin's appointment as the new Irish under-20 coach is coming on the back of what he's done in the Connacht Academy. I think Connacht can field nearly a full back line of homegrown players between, I'm going to say Kieran Marmie and Jack Carty, Robbie Henshaw, Tiernan O'Halloran. They literally can fill 1 to 15 with realistic options of Connacht homegrown players. So I think Mullaghina's role there is to bring those young lads on, expose them to high pressure situations and help them to deal with it. And if 10 minutes at the end of the game against La Rochelle helps it, that's what will happen.
It might be slightly more accent in the design, but Pat Lam has had to blood an awful lot of players so far this season. It's interesting that he has brought Quinn Rue back, a guy who was discarded, Craig Ronaldson, who maybe last year didn't get a hold of the game time, but it's now become their first choice 12. Guys like Shane Delahunt, who was ditched by the Leinster Academy and has now played 3 games at hooker for Connacht. These are guys who weren't expected to play much game time this year, and yet Lam gives them a chance.
Yeah, I think Pat Lam's been very clever, to be quite honest. I think what he's done is numerous coaches have come into Connacht and they focused on the coaching and they focused on trying to make Connacht a better rugby team. I think Pat Lam identified that they were quite a capable rugby team on their day, and it was their headspace that they needed to get right. I watched the game against Cardiff when they were 2 scores up and Cardiff came back and scored a try, and there was, I suppose, a little bit of a same old Connacht in the national media. I would argue the other one. I would argue that he had very inexperienced players. He had Jack Carty at 10. Jack's got started I think every game so far this year, but relative terms to what he was playing against, he's an inexperienced player. They had Craig Ronaldson at 12. They had a lot of inexperienced players. When you consider what Cardiff had, they had 2 British Lions. They had the British and Irish Lions captain on the team, and that Connacht team are only going to grow for that. And when you bring Mullaghina in and McCarthy in and Adebunke in, it's going to be a very strong Connacht squad. And can they keep the run? That's arguable because they may not have the strength in depth, but I think they will be very competitive, and I think a top 6 is a realistic chance this year.
And the final note for you then, the Challenge Cup for them this year is about giving second string a run as far as you'd be concerned. Maybe wait and see how they do in the pool.
Well, I think the La Rochelle have maybe bigger fish to fry at home. They want to stay in the top 14. It's a big financial commitment for them to try and compete there, so they want to stay in that revenue stream. They don't want to go out, so they may not take this weekend as seriously as required. I'm not sure if a second string French team struggling with relegation would like the sports ground on a cold, wet, windy October evening. So I think Connacht could get a win this weekend with a weaker side, and I think they'll take it from there. Then they're definitely good enough. They've brought Toulon to Galway previously and gave it to them, and it's a competition that possibly they could go a long way, but I think their commitment is to the Pro 12 this year. They've put their money where their mouth is and they're backing it up at the moment.